Hello guys, and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be looking at all the different tools that I use when trying to min-max my character. We're going to be talking about how to become a better healer. We'll look at raids, mythic plus, different third-party tools, WeakAuras, add-ons that are almost considered to be mandatory. So let's go and get started. So when you first begin your WoW journey, it's important to pick up good habits and stick with them. For example, things like adding keybinds, using Mouseover macros. Those things are going to optimize your character, and you're going to be using them for most of your journey in World of Warcraft. So for example, Mouseover macros, there's multiple ways of setting them up. Again, you can use add-ons, like Clique. You can use, for example, the default WoW implementation in terms of the UI. You can go into options, you can go into keybinds, and you can go into Clique casting. And this is basically going to be, and honestly, a copy of another really popular add-on called Clique. This is basically what Blizzard implemented it. So for example, you can go into your Restoration Druid, and for example, I want to bind my Rejuvenation. And I'm going to be binding it to my left click button, click save, and now if I left click hover over myself, it's going to cast Rejuvenation. It's very important to not sleep on the keybind that is left mouse button and right mouse button. I use it for a lot of my healers, so I use it for every single healer that I play. But you might be wondering, hey MadSkillz, your left click button is going to click Rejuvenation. What do you do in terms of targeting players in open world, opening or trading with them and things like that? I just have it assigned to alt left click and alt right click to open the menu. So that's something that I use for every single healer. Again, don't sleep on the prime real estate that is left and right click in terms of assigning your keybinds. A lot of other people might also be using certain different add-ons. For example, Clique is very popular because it used to be like the main option for a lot of players out there. And again, it's just basically Blizzard copied this version and it's available in game. You don't have to use this add-on, but I'm using it because I just have all my keybinds here and all my little macros. Just think of Clique and all of these things as a more easier way to make macros. If you're someone who just makes Mouseover macros, you're basically to some extent doing the same thing, but you just don't have to write it. It's just a lot easier to micromanage it with add-ons. And for example, here in the spell menu, we open Clique, and then I can see my Rejuvenation. I want to bind it to left click button. I just click left, and you can see it right here. Now, if you're using Clique for more, or if you want to go more in depth in terms of, for example, I can right click on this, enable disable binding key set, and then I click on hovercast, which basically allows me to hover over the person here, and again, I can cast regrowths on them by clicking the associated keybind. This is great because you can assign things like your dispels for afflicted or healing adds on Firak. So that's just another little thing that you can do with Clique. Again, if you're not using this add-on, you will have different ways of doing that with Mouseover macros. And the last thing about Mouseover macros, because if you're someone who's just looking to do PvP content and maybe mythic plus content, there's a different way of actually healing. Because let's say, for example, if you're doing PvP 3 versus 3, or if you're doing mythic plus with 5 players, you can assign a keybind for each member in your group. You have a keybind to select target 1, select target 2, or player 3, player 4, player 5. So you click that keybind, it targets that person, and then you click an associated keybind to heal them. There is a lot of mythic plus pushers, some of the top end mythic plus pushers, who use this system, which means that you basically have your mouse for yourself. You don't really do anything with your mouse besides targeting enemies and things like that, because a lot of your target healing is coming from your keybinds. Now, this works great in something like small content like PvP and like mythic plus content, but when it comes to raiding, you're not really going to have 20 different keybinds associated with it. So if you're a new healer who's looking to dabble into raiding, Mouseover macros are going to probably give you the best option, because it's going to be less convoluted to set up. But if you're someone who's just looking to do PvP and then maybe mythic plus content, you can look at the method of targeting or assigning keybind to target all of your members, or member 1, member 2, member 3. Let's talk a little about macros and maybe setting them up with add-ons like Clique and things like that. Again, you don't have to use Clique. I've been kind of harping on about Clique, but for example, if you're playing a healer, and I think healers right now are just overly convoluted with the amount of keybinds you have, you can set up help and harm macros, which is very important, or set up macros like this. For example, if I don't have Water Shield, I can shift tab on myself to apply Water Shield. Now, if I shift and tab without selecting a friendly target, I'm going to be casting Earthen Wall Totem. And this is very easy to set up with add-ons like Clique or macros. You can do this in multiple different ways. I'm just showing you the way I do it. So for example, here I have a shift tab for cast Water Shield. I right click on this, enable disable binding set, and I click on friendly. So that means if I use my keybind, which is shift tab, that's going to cast Water Shield. Now I also have another keybind which is also shift tab, But in this case, it's going to cast Earth and Wall Totem, and I right click on this, enable disable binding key set, and I select global binding, no target. So what this achieves, if I don't have a friendly target, it's going to cast Earth and Wall Totem. If I do have a friendly target as a Mouseover, it'll cast Water Shield. And you can do that for pretty much anything out there, because healers just seem to have so many keybinds, because you're DPSing, you're healing, you're using utility and things like that. Let's talk about health frame add-ons, and in my case, you can see here I'm using Grid 2. So again, it shows me debuffs or buffs. It shows debuffs in terms of changes color when it's a magic dispel, it changes color to red. When there's a bleed dispel, it changes color when there's a decurse. I have it configured in such a way that I really like it. A lot of the health frame add-ons, they're not made equal in terms of some of the health frame add-ons out of the box are really poor in terms of what they provide, or the looks, or the appearance. For example, Grid 2 by default, when you first install it, it's not really amazing. You have to spend a decent amount of time in terms of configuring it to make it look or feel, again, appropriate. Now, there's nothing wrong about using the default Blizzard frames. A lot of top-end Mythic Plus pushers and raiders are still using it. But in terms of customization, default Blizzard frames are really lacking in that department. Some of the most popular health frame add-ons out there is going to be things like Voodoo is very popular, Grid 2 is popular, LVUI party frames are really popular as well. Again, a lot of people are still using Healbot. Choices are kind of insane, and every single add-on has advantages and disadvantages. I don't think there is one health frame add-on that is just absolutely perfect. Again, I do have to mention that there are quite a few newcomers. For example, in my case, or in this case, you can see Cell. This is something that I've been told about, and honestly, I only heard good things about this. This is relatively new, or at least relatively new in World of Warcraft, because this game has been around forever. Another add-on is a Pechka. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's becoming popular, very decent out of the box and things like that. I didn't get to test these two add-ons because they're relatively new, but I've heard good things about this. Let's go to the WeakAuras section, and this is going to be the only WeakAuras that I think are almost or as close to mandatory as a healer, especially when it comes to Mythic Plus content. And first of all, we're going to talk about targeted spells. This WeakAuras is going to show on your frames abilities that are going to be cast on your friendly players, and they're going to be taking damage. Honestly, I almost feel like this should be implemented by default in World of Warcraft, because if you're doing high key levels in Mythic Plus and there's going to be a big bolt that's going to be cast at your friendly target who's already 50% HP, you know that if you don't heal them up in the next 1 or 2 seconds, depending on the cast, that person is going to die. So having this information is honestly insanely important. If there's only one thing that you're going to pick up from this video, is having this WeakAuras or this WeakAuras equivalent is really important when doing Mythic Plus content. Also, another WeakAuras that I find really interesting is going to be targeted by damage spells, and again, this is going to be by Tossies. The targeted spells was made by Buds. I'm going to be adding these descriptions in there, or these links in the description below. This is a WeakAuras that basically shows you in the middle of the screen when an ability is going to be targeting you, which means that it might be a really good time to press a defensive. If you don't want to get these two separate WeakAuras, you can get this WeakAuras right here, which is Mythic Plus targeted spells DF3 or DF Season 3 by Twix, which basically incorporates all the WeakAuras that I showed you. On top of that, it also has a frontal alert. It's basically all up to you in terms of what you want to do. If you want, you can pick up a package that includes everything, or if you want, you can have two separate WeakAuras that, again, we'll have to see how often they're going to be updated, but these WeakAuras are probably the only thing that I consider almost mandatory. Let's go and talk about optimizing your gear as a new healer coming into World of Warcraft. Again, I don't want to talk about gearing too much right now, because it's far more important to, again, understand your gameplay than actually optimize your gear, especially if your gear is really low, item level is going to be a king and things like that. But if you reach a certain point level or high item level point where you want to optimize raids, Mythic Plus and things like that, questionably Epic Live is going to be your go-to tool as a healer. It's basically, if you play the DPS in World of Warcraft and use raid bots, this is basically the equivalent of that for healers. It's not exactly simming healing, but it's the next best thing. And in order to use it, let's go and basically do a little showcase. The great thing about this is that it's going to compare the gear that you have in your bags to the gear that you have currently equipped, and you can, again, filter it based on raids, Mythic Plus, based on gear that is more focused towards HPS, or gear that is kind of focused a little bit more towards damage, which is really great. You're going to need another add-on for this, so you'll need something like Simulation Craft, which you can install from CurseForge and things like that. Once you have this, go into your, again, character screen or your main character, type in /simc, and then Control-C the code that you see here, or copy the code that you see here right now, and then go back to questionably Epic Live. And in this case, we're going to click on SimC, and in here we're going to paste the code. We're going to click Submit, and then you can go to things like Top Gear. And now you can see all of the gear that you have equipped right now and the gear that you have in your bags, and you can select the items to compare them. You can select the trinkets, you can select the rings, and it's going to compare them against the currently equipped rings. And at the very top, depending on the character you're playing and things like that, you can click on the optional settings and say like, hey, I want my playstyle to be healing focused or more balanced in terms of healing and DPS. Because you have to remember, if you're playing healer in something like Mythic Plus content, DPS does play a little bit of a part. And once you're set, you can click the button go at the very bottom, and you're going to be met with a screen telling you which are going to be, or which items might be an upgrade. Again, this is using my raid set, and there is no upgrades right now because I'm using this website to optimize my gear in a lot of different ways. You also have to remember that I was using a healing focused settings here, so it's going to prioritize mastery and things like that, or mastery is going to play a more important part. If I change it to dungeon, or if I go back to the gear selection, change it to dungeon and click go, it's going to give me a different set of gear options, because there is going to be a different stat priority for Mythic Plus content versus raids. And this tool, or Questionably Epic Live, has multiple different things besides this. It has Upgrade Finder, for example, if you're doing 1920 keys, you're doing heroic raids, you can check out which raids are going to give you options, or which dungeons are going to give you upgrades, and maybe you want to focus on them. It's going to be great when you're doing a new season and you're trying to optimize your time in terms of getting the best gear. It also has trinket comparisons. It's important to always know which setting you're in. If you're looking at the dungeon trinkets, they're going to be very different from something like raid trinkets, where, for example, Spark of Hope is great in raid, but it's not really something that you're going to be using in Mythic Plus content. So this tool, honestly, absolutely fantastic. Mess around with the option settings, whether you're going to be healing focused or balanced, depending on your class and things like that. But honestly, really, really top notch. Let's talk a little bit about raiding, about finding talents, finding the gameplay, or how to read Warcraft logs. So you're probably familiar with Warcraft logs because it's very, very popular. For example, here, click into raids, click onto something like ratings. And I want to find out, for example, I started playing my Mystery Monk very recently for the raid because they wanted Mystery Monk, and I kind of wanted to figure out some of the popular talent builds and the gameplay, or at least try and see what some of the top performing Mystery Monks were running or how they were playing. So click into healing right here, and then in my case, I'm going to be looking at Mystery Monks, and you go to Monk, Mistweaver, and then you'll be able to see a screen of, hey, these are some of the most popular talents for Naru, the first boss. Keep in mind, the top HPS logs can be misleading. You need to know what you're looking at and things like that. It's very, very important to acknowledge that top performing players and specs and logs out there can be sometimes a little bit misleading. But I look at some of the popular trinket choices, some of the talents, and for example here I click into the first boss and I'm looking at some of the popular talent builds right here, and I could again make my own judgment about which talent build I should be running. Keep in mind there's been some recent changes and it takes a little while to reflect it, but it's a great tool. In my case, for example, I might want to look at some of the performing or top performing Mystery Monks. I click into them, I can see the healing breakdown. Again, if in order to rank in like top HPS, you're going to be in a lot of times solo healing or duo healing content, and that's going to be providing you with different kind of results. You might be looking at this and you're like, how did this guy do 400k HPS? There were 2 healing the first boss. So that's something to consider. And you might look at the usage of Vivify. You might be looking, for example, if you want to really see the breakdown of what this person was doing in terms of what buttons they were pressing, you might be looking at something like timelines. Now, timeline is pretty great, but I actually enjoy using another tool like WoW Analyzer. Copy the URL of this Warcraft log or any Warcraft log that you're checking, or even your Warcraft log. Go into WoW Analyzer, paste it in the main screen, and then you can see a kind of breakdown of the bosses they did. Naru in my example, and I'm checking this Mystery Monk right here. Now, WoW Analyzer is only going to be as good, or it's going to severely depend on the class you're playing, because it might not be fully updated, but what I really want to check out here is a timeline. And for example, here I'm going to check out what this person was using, what they were casting, at what time they were casting, what were the ramps like, and I can kind of analyze their gameplay and learn from it. I can also go into the cooldown section and see how they were managing their cooldowns, what they were pressing, and again, this is how you're going to, if you want to put in the time to learn some of the gameplay options, because gameplay is a lot more important, or gameplay is the most important aspect of playing any class in World of Warcraft. I'm not saying this is the only or the main way to learn your class. There's multiple different guides out there, but honestly, just looking at different logs, analyzing logs, seeing what other people are doing, if you're willing to invest the time, you're going to get or reap results from it. Outside of that, if you're unsure about when to use your cooldowns, there's other websites like Lorx. Going back to my example where I'm learning to play Mystery or Monk, and I'm unsure about when to use my cooldowns. Again, we're doing farm content. We don't really have healer cooldowns assigned, so we're kind of using them whatever. But you can click on Mystery or Monk right here, and you can go for the first boss. And you can look at, hey, a lot of Mystery or Monks are using Yu'lon at the very start. They're using Revival here. You can take on something like, for example, it's very, very important, Smoldering Seedling, and a lot of people are using Smoldering Seedling 38 seconds into the fight. And you can do that for all the fights out there, from Ferak, from Tindral. You can filter it based on different cooldowns. Again, Shaylun's Gift. When are people using Shaylun's Gift? And this works for a lot of classes out there. And look who made an appearance here for the video, my little feral druid right here. What I'm trying to say is that healing cooldowns are going to be very finicky, because a lot of the times if you're doing progression raid content, your healing cooldowns are going to be already pre-assigned. But a lot of the raid leaders might not be sure when to assign cooldowns, and honestly, Logs is actually pretty decent in terms of judging your raid cooldowns based on the composition that you have. So if you're, for example, doing Ferak and you have, let's say, one Mystery or Monk, one Holy Paladin, one Disciplined Priest, and one Holy Priest, you can click search and you can see what other players or what other compositions based on your comp are using in terms of, hey, Holy Paladin is using Aura Master 39 seconds in. You can see Holy Priest is using their Divine Hymn 145. Like, you can again, this is this is still in kind of like in a beta section, but you can see what other similar comps are using for progression rating or when they're using the cooldowns, and you can kind of follow them to some extent, but be very aware this is still kind of under construction and it's a little bit kind of finicky. Let's go back towards gearing and stats and all those things. Another website that I like to use is going to be Murloc.io. Honestly, this is more known for its PvP, so if you're doing PvP, you probably already know about this, but for example, here I want to check out what stats Resto Druids are using in Mythic Plus content. So I go to Druids, I click on Restoration, and then you click at the very top here, Mythic Plus. And this is going to give you a kind of overview of some of the best Resto Druids and Mythic Plus content. You can click into them to see what gear they're using. But this is also going to provide an overview of stat priority. For example, here, a lot of the Resto Druids here who are doing really, really high Mythic Plus content, they're going to be using a certain amount of haste and a certain amount of versatility, or around those levels. And this gives you a little bit more of an overview in terms of what stats to use. Keep in mind, another big caveat. If you're looking at some of the top end Resto Druids, versatility is going to be really important, because versatility plays a really important part when it comes to surviving high tyrannical keys. These people are doing plus 30s in terms of high tyrannicals, and there's going to be a lot of one-shot mechanics, and you need versatility because versatility reduces the damage you take. That's another important aspect. If you're someone who's doing plus 20 weekly keys, there's nothing wrong about going haste and mastery, because these are some of the best throughput stats. But if you're looking to do the highest keys in the world, or pushing keys, this is a breakdown of some of the most popular stats, and I think that's interesting. Besides that, it gives you an overview of talents, but talents can be finicky. It gives you an overview of gear and things like that. Another tool that's going to be very similar is going to be Archon, which, again, if you used to use Subcreation, which kind of got shut down, Archon is the successor of this, and you can go into healers, you can go into, for example, Restoration Druid, and you can see the Mythic Plus build for them. You can see the stat priority is very popular for them. You can see the talents, or at least a summary of some of the most popular talents. You can also go into gearing section. You can see what enchants they're using, popular trinkets. Again, there's a lot of ways to optimize your gearing, to look at the most popular gearing options, to look at the most popular stat options. But if you want to check everyone manually rated, REO is another website that a lot of people might be using. For example, I might go into the Mythic Plus section, I'll go into spec leaderboards, and I'll go into Druid and Restoration. I'm using Resto Druid as an example. Obviously, you can use it for all the other healers, all the other classes out there, and then you will see some of the highest rated Restoration Druids in the game, and you can click into them and see what gear they're using in order to push Mythic Plus raids. Again, keep in mind, this is going to log the gear that they logged out with. So in this example, using something like 7th Spine is most likely for their raid gearing set. So it's important to acknowledge that. It's important to acknowledge that sometimes people log out in raid gear, sometimes they log out in Mythic Plus gear, but you can look at some of the embellishments gear sets, or you can use a lot of the other sites that I used before or showcased. Guys, let me know how I feel about this. This video has been very long, and I really apologize about this. Let me know if you have. I showed so many tools out there in terms of raids, in terms of Mythic Plus, in terms of, again, optimizing your spell usage, optimizing your gameplay, optimizing your gear, optimizing your, again, finding out which gear is going to be the right way to go. Let me know if I missed out on certain tools. Let me know if you have WeakAuras that you consider almost to be mandatory. Let me know if you consider, or add-ons that you consider to be really useful as a healer in World of Warcraft, especially if you're beginning your journey. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. All the links and things that are going to be in the description below. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in my next guide.